there's men out there listening to this, I would really encourage you, just lean in, learn what's going on, because as you bump up against your inadequacies, you also bump up against the absolute glory that is childbirth. Just the amazing design, the amazing things that our wives do, what their bodies do, how they were made, what's actually happening. It's absolutely incredible.
Welcome to the Happy Homebirth Podcast, your source for positive natural childbirth stories and your community of support, education, and encouragement in all things homebirth and motherhood. Dads, how does the idea of your wife giving birth make you feel? Does the idea immediately excite you and light you up? Or does it put a level of fear in you? Do you wonder how you can protect her and your baby? Do you feel out of control? Hey there, happy homebirthers, and welcome to this week's episode of the Happy Homebirth Podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Fusco, and this week, all the way on episode 276, we're doing something new. We are hearing a homebirth story completely from the perspective of the father. Today, we're speaking to Dustin Garrett, a husband, father to two, and new to the club homebirth dad. Now, Dustin and I got in touch after the birth of his daughter, Ember, in January of this year. He works for Samaritan Ministries, and when he reached out to me from the Samaritan account, thanking me for this podcast, which, thank you, that's so nice, I was completely thrilled. Because number one, who doesn't love hearing a successful home birth story? And number two, because, wait, Samaritan is in my DMs? I have been a member for years and I love them. In this episode, you'll get to hear a little bit more about why that's the case. Okay, let's waste no time and dive in. Please remember that the opinions of my guests may not necessarily reflect my own and vice versa. And the show is not medical advice, it's an educational tool. So continue to take empowered responsibility for your health and your family. Dustin, thank you so much for coming on the Happy Homebirth Podcast.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am so excited. And as we were discussing just before we press record, this is our first solo episode with a dad sharing his experience of he and his wife giving birth at home and all the things that relate to it. So thank you for being our number one.
I am so honored that that is the case. What a joy.
Oh, it's going to be great. And you have such an incredible story. So before we dive into it, would you mind taking just a moment to introduce yourself and your family to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Dustin Garrett. I have a lovely wife named Kendra, and we have a 3-year-old son named Ren, and obviously a newborn daughter named Ember. And we've been married for 14 years. And I would say, just quickly, just to introduce who we are, my wife grew up on the mission field in the Philippines with her family. And far, far away, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. And I definitely wasn't on the mission field. In fact, I was I was the person on that needed to be on the receiving end of some missionary work, because where I grew up, there was I spent a good part of my teenage years and early 20s just absolutely completely addicted to drugs, so much so that I was actually deep into heroin addiction, and that brought me down all sorts of terrible paths and jail time and just wrecking everything within my path. And by God's grace, though, I ended up in a homeless shelter in Illinois where there was a program, a long-term program for men. And it was the first time in my life some men came alongside me and kind of opened up the Bible and led me to what really the truth that ended up setting me free. And so that's kind of just a little bit of background there in regards to I'm now 20 years on the other side of that. I'm 41 now. My wife is 33. So that really worked out. That really worked out for me. But after the rescue mission, I ended up going off to Bible college. And I spent 7 years in Bible college where I met my lovely wife. And yeah, so but we're now, we live here in Central Illinois. I lead music at our church. I also work full time for Samaritan Ministries, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And then also, I'm just in the throes of loving being a dad, wrestling my son at night and cuddling a newborn baby, getting all those cuddles in. So, yeah.
Mm, that is the best. Wow. There are so many things that I feel like I could say about your story, but isn't it incredible though when you are taken out of a scenario so deeply bad, so wretched, the amount of love and freedom that you experience on the other side and just it's like, "Oh, well, I'll never go back. I can never go back. I've been saved. I've been rescued."
Yeah, there's a lot of abundant life that I
Yeah.
didn't know that what God had waiting for me, and I'm so thankful for that. And I don't deserve any of this. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was 15 years old, my girlfriend had gotten pregnant. And I remember, back then this was in the 90s. I would say this was in the 1900s. And I remember though getting the call from her, and it was back when you had the landline in the kitchen, and it had one of those big long dangly cords, so you could reach everywhere in the kitchen, and the cord was always tangled up. And I got a call from my girlfriend, and she had told me that she was pregnant. And right after she said that on the phone, I heard a voice on the phone say, "Hang up the phone now." And back then, if you were on a landline, your parents could pick up a phone in another room and listen in on your conversations, as long as they were kind of, a little bit sneaky about it. And so the next thing I knew, me and her, my parents and her parents were all in her basement talking about what we should do. And at the time, I had no clue of what being a dad, anything like that. And the decision was made at that time that we would terminate the pregnancy, abort the child, and that I would pay for it. And I remember at the time, like initially being relieved at that, because the big lie that was floating around in our heads, and also that was being told, is that if you have this child, that it's going to ruin your life. All of your opportunities going forward will be gone. I remember like there being an initial sense of relief, because I was terrified at the prospect of the responsibility of being a dad at 15 years old. But I remember after my girlfriend had gotten the abortion, she had called me and was describing to me on the phone, the experience and being on this table and these cold instruments, and she was just weeping about it. And instead of it being a relief, it ended up being something that just would haunt me. I thought about, was it a boy or a girl, and all that. I think really just further led us down a path of drug addiction. And it makes sense, why heroin was so appealing, because it kind of numbs you not only physically but emotionally as well. And unfortunately, um, my girlfriend ended up losing her life to a drug overdose. And it was many years that I tried to not think about all that. And after I really came to know the Lord and started thinking through and trying to reconcile that, I found forgiveness in Christ. And even though there was a lot of that story, and it still is, it's not fully finished. Like there's no buttoning that up. I did find a lot of peace in God's sovereignty and God's forgiveness, and I'm so thankful for that. I will say though that for a long time there was this lie that was just still floating in my head, that since I had done that, that I would never have children. And I'm sure I'm not the only one out there who has been on the other side of an abortion, that seems to think that there needs to be extra punishment for that, and that would manifest itself in not being able to have children, and that God would somehow be like, okay, well, you did this, and so now I'm not gonna give you. And I guess I didn't really know that that lie was there until I started talking about it, and I realized that I was believing that what Jesus had done wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Then I needed there needed to be more atonement for my sin. And so my wife and I were married for 10 years before our son was born. And there was a good part of that. I feel like that I believed that we just weren't going to have kids because of what I've done. And obviously, on this podcast today, happy to report that that's not true. And again, maybe perhaps that would encourage somebody out there too, if you're listening, and those lies are there. That's not true. So all that kind of hopefully brings you up to speed in regards to just the absolute joy of
Mm,
getting to talk about bringing a baby into this
oh,
world and doing it at home.
mm.
What a sweet, sweet gift.
Oh, it really is. One of the things that I think about with you speaking about this, of how, you tried to not even think of it for so long. And
Yeah.
then once you did receive forgiveness, then it's almost like in my story I shared just a couple of weeks ago, how Jesus walked me back to the pit that I had dug. He walked me back, and he very tenderly and gently showed me the damage.
Mhm.
And it wasn't in a way of, look what you did, you're so bad.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was just showing everything for what it
Mhm.
was. And in those moments, comforting me,
Mhm.
allowing me to grieve, but with
Mhm.
his arm around me and holding
Mhm.
me. And then
Mhm.
now, okay, we've seen it. We've seen the damage. Now we get to walk away and we get to
Yeah.
go to freedom.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
Yeah.
experienced anything like that.
Yeah, I think talking about it, bringing it into the light, having some people and getting to work through it in a way that people that love me, that have, a good solid grasp on what's true and what's not. I think for a long time it just remained there because I tried to avoid it, or I never actually verbalized it to anybody.
Mm,
So, which makes sense. You want to hide that, but there definitely is freedom when you begin to bring it out into the light, and you begin to, get some counsel from people that, have your best, interest in mind, that they care about you, and they also have a pretty robust framework of eternity. So I think that's where then on the other side of it, now I've been able to, talk a lot about it more from a man's point of view and how deeply it affected me.
mhm,
There's a lie out there that, men, just don't care. They shouldn't be involved in that conversation. But for me, I can say it affected me to such a core level. And so now to be able to talk about it, and talk about it in a way that's, yes, it still affects me. I still, look back, and it actually ended up ruining a large part of our lives by making that choice,
mm,
which is why we try to plead with folks to bring these babies,
yeah,
bring them in, and I try to plead with the church too, that if there's young folks who are in that situation, to bend over backwards for them, to say, hey, we're going to come alongside and really help you,
mm,
here, and offer a resource to them. Because at that time, there was nobody in our life that, were Christians, that were saying, hey, it's not going to ruin your life. We got your back. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And so I try to do that now.
Wow. Wow, that is beautiful.
Mm.
And as you already alluded to, here we are on the other side of that, on this beautiful, joyful,
Mm.
bringing children into the world and experiencing them and loving them. And
Hmm.
I'm so excited for us to dive into that. And I know that you've had two different birthing experiences. Would you mind kind of sharing with us,
Yeah.
one, what it was like when your wife got pregnant that first time, and then
Hmm.
walk us through that pregnancy birth experience?
Yeah, I feel like we've actually had like three birth experiences, because with our son, we started off in a birth center, but then we got transferred to a hospital because we were like 30 plus hours in, and my wife was exhausted. And so we got to experience the birth center. Then we got to experience the hospital. And then obviously here with our daughter, we got to experience birth at home. And so I feel like I mean, obviously, yeah, there's people out there that have more experience than me, but I definitely, there's things I could speak into to all three of those from our specific situation.
I would love that. Let's do it.
Yeah, so, with our son, when he was born and we went to the birth center, I feel like at that time it was our first child and it was like, I was nervous. I was I was nervous. I think a lot of dads probably are. It's like I just want everyone to be safe. Like I would imagine most dads that would be like, "Hey, I'm going to do everything I can. I want everyone to be safe, and whatever you need me to pay." That's probably, a lot of dads that I've talked to, that's been the case. Like, okay. And so when my wife and I were talking about it, and we're like, okay, well, we'd like to avoid the hospital if we can. No shade on the hospitals, but as far as birthing goes, we were like, we'd like to avoid the hospitals because we knew that, they want to take things in a route. It's a hospital. They got an agenda. And so we were like, okay, we would really love to do the birth at this birthing center, which was about 30 minutes from our house. And we had a great experience there with the folks. I felt like, okay, this was like a good, like, in between. You know what I mean? Like, this was a good in between. At that time, I'll be honest with you, if my wife would have started talking about home birth, I would probably have been more scared,
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have been like, "Oh, I just don't feel like I feel sorely inadequate." You know? And I would imagine that's probably how most dads probably they bump up against some of that. And I can say as a man, typically, I don't like to bump up against where my knowledge and adequacies stop, you know? So when we went to the birth center, we had a good experience there, and I knew that there was a possibility to get transferred to the hospital. So I was preparing as much as I could. We had our midwife, we had our doula also too. Praise God for them. And so I was sold on the midwife idea. I was sold on the doula idea. I just knew I needed some folks in our corner. you know, you know. And so through that whole process, then going to the hospital, and the hospital, yeah, there was a lot of stuff there, and this was 2021, so it was still we were in the COVID world, and there was all sorts of weird stuff. And we were 30 hours into this birth. At that time, I was exhausted, she was exhausted, and I was trying to hold it together. But there was a lot of things about the hospital experience that were just like, oh, it was really taxing. It was really taxing to have someone come in there every 30 minutes. It was really taxing, be asked 1,000 questions. It was really taxing a lot. Pretty much the whole birth plan that we had just had to go out the window. We had a whole plan. And probably people probably can resonate with this. The whole plan, just, just all right. Plan. We're on plan, D, E, and F right now. And but praise God, my son, he was born. There was a little bit of a traumatic birth in that he had. I shouldn't say traumatic, but he was just covered in meconium. He was just swamp thing when he came out, and they had to kind of get him breathing and things like that. And as a first time dad, that was just terrifying. Like, when he first comes out, and I'm expecting, like, okay, baby, come out and hand baby to mom. Got baby. Instead, he was rushed onto these lamps onto this platform where they putting tubes down his throat and sucking things out, and time just seemed to stop. Like, slow, it was just in slow motion, and there was a light beeping and sirens going off and people rushing into the room. Next thing we knew, there's like 10 people in there frantically, moving about and all that. And he ended up spending some time, in the intensive care spot. And so, anyway, all that to say, praise God, he got stabilized. We stayed in the hospital for an extra like 2 days. And so, for our son's birth, we went to the birth center on Monday and we didn't get home till Friday. It was just a total marathon of the will, of physical and sleep, like sleep deprivation to the core. So we got back home to our house with our son, and I remember just feeling like, I don't know, like it was like it didn't feel like our home almost, you know, like it just felt like a different place. Like we were in the negative, like
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, mentally, we were at a deficit, you know.
It
And
sounds like you had this long labor, and then you have this long pause before recovery even. It's like,
yes, well, and my wife, she had like third degree tearing.
mm,
Duh, I know. I was like, so that made like our first like I mean months. Like we came home in a deficit, and then we had been married for 10 years at this time, and so adding another human to the situation already. What I mean, we did a lot of planning, but it was already like there was no plan. There was no planning great enough to adequately, really, get us, to the spot where that new lifestyle, like we were going to be able to just take that in stride. Like it was really hard. I'll be honest with you. It was a really difficult like 6 to 9 months.
yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, that's 10 years of routine. That's 10
Yes.
years of routine of the two of you. Now we're
Yes.
doing this new thing? Like, what is this?
Yes. Yeah. And it was a lot. And we were, all those things. And my wife is a planner. She's a gifted planner. She has the spiritual gift of, of planning. And so, where I kind of take things a little more as they come.
Free.
Yeah. And so, yeah, praise God for her. Cause yeah, if
Mhm.
it, there was a lot of things that she was able to kind of plan for, but again, we weren't able to fully plan for all that. So, but our son he's grown to just a really sweet, fine young man, and we just are overjoyed with him. But I felt like that set us up for when we got pregnant with our daughter, which my wife told me on Mother's Day. It was really sweet. I came home from church. We came home from church on Mother's Day, and she told me, and it was like, oh. And I will say to this real quick, when we first found out, we were pregnant with our son, we both like thought that it was going to be a girl. We were like 90, like we just, because all there's so many girls in our family. My wife has two sisters. I have two sisters. We have all female animals in the family. It was just like, there's no way this is not going to be a girl. And when we found out it was a boy, we experienced like a bit of like bummer about that. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like I
I
had it
think
in my,
plenty of people have
yeah.
experienced that.
And I had it in my head like holding this little girl,
Mm.
and I always kind of, I don't know, I always kind of thought to back to the abortion side of things. For some reason, I always just pictured a little girl,
Mm.
and so I didn't realize until that time too that I had this longing to just, be a girl dad.
Mm.
you
Wow.
know so anyway, fast forward, we find out we're pregnant, this time, and then we find out it's a girl, and we're just overjoyed at that. Then we started talking about, okay, well, do we want to go back to the birth center, or my wife brought up, do we want to do a home birth? And initially I was like, okay, initially I would say inside of me again that same sort of feeling of like, I don't feel like I'm I'm quite adequate, like, are you sure you're trusting me? Here. And but then we started talk we well, here's the thing. We started talking about it, and my wife started listening to a podcast about it.
Hmm.
Huh, I wonder what podcast that could be. It was your podcast, and she started listening to it, and she started, we started talking about it, and then we started going, what are the risks? Because that's usually what's going on with what's the risk there. And
Mhm.
for me, I'm like, okay, what are the risks? Let's weigh them out. Weigh out the risk. And realistically, I didn't know what all the risks were. At this point, though, I knew what the risks were going into the birth center, that we could be transferred to the hospital. And so realistically, it was like, okay, well, I know that that's always a possibility. And since we did that, we knew what that process was like. And realistically, like from where we live, from the birth center to the hospital, from our house to a hospital, it's about the same distance. I remember the ambulance ride from the birth center to the hospital. I was driving behind, and I could see my wife's little head bouncing in the back of the ambulance. I remember that drive. It was a 10-minute drive, but it felt like an eternity.
Mhm.
And you're driving and just praying, okay, please God, you're in, Lord, please intervene, state. But so we started talking to them about the risks and stuff, and we were looking into midwives, and I was totally sold on the midwife and doula route. And so we started looking into that. And then I think little by little, my wife just kept talking to me. Okay, here's how it could look. Here's the people that could be involved. Let's go meet with the midwife. Let's talk to her. I was really interested to talk to her to see how many home births she had done, because I knew that I had done zero. you, you know, uh, so, and I wanted to be honest about that, and I wanted to be honest with him, like, hey, I was trying to be open to the idea, even though I think there were a lot of things that initially concerned me. And the more that I began to listen to other stories about it, the more I began to talk to some experts who had actually been at home births, which, like, our midwife had done like 600. And so I was like, okay, she probably knows a thing or two about about this. And I think also too, I remember when we met with our midwife, I had asked her about the tearing thing, because that's when I was like, okay, because if we had to transfer the hospital, we transfer. But I was kind of concerned that, okay, if this tearing happens and there's some sort of situation on that, like, that was concerning to me, because I remember being in the hospital and the doctor coming in and having to stitch up my wife. And amazingly, our midwife shared with us that in the 600 births that she did, there was none of them that had gone to a third degree tearing. And I was like, really? Like, she's like, yeah, there's been, like, first, second, but like none of them I haven't seen any in 600 bursts. I'm like, that's an amazing statistic. you know, like, obviously it's not an impossibility, but 600 to zero is like pretty. I'm like, okay, like, that sounds awesome. And as we learned more about positioning and what sort of things can cause some tearing, obviously, like, looking into thinking about why that would happen and how an epidural affects things, how laying on your back affects things. It started to make sense to me there. And I was like, okay, well, that would be awesome. Lord, if we can if we can have this baby with no tearing, because that was brutal. I mean, that was brutal for my wife. You know what I mean? Like, that was really tough. So that was one of the things that I was like, okay, this is a really good stat. I can latch on to this. And then my wife and I started listening to a book about natural childbirth. We started watching a video series. I don't know if I can shout out any specific resources, but we started watching a video series about birth. In this video series, they actually showed, like, home births. Like, they had, like, at the end of each lesson, these home birth videos. So now, like, okay, so and I'm doing a lot of talking here, but this is was really important to me. Listening to your podcast and hearing people share their stories about birth is super helpful, because I get to hear all the behind the scenes. I get to hear their concerns. I get to hear what happened. I'm getting more and more knowledge, and then seeing videos of home births. I will tell you, I would dare to say there's not too many men out there who are watching birthing videos unless they have a birth coming up. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know of any men, any of my friends, anything, who would just be like, you know what? I really would like to know what it looks like. I'd like to be in the room when there's like a birth going on. Most men, like, for a lot of history, like my dad's age, and all the men I think before that, they would just not want to be involved at all. They would just literally, like, not even want to be present. They just leave. They would just say, hey, like, let me know when the baby is here. Like, they wouldn't even be present. And you know what, tell you the truth, I kind of get that desire, because there is something that really makes you aware that you are not in control, and and that you are in over your head. I mean, even
Wow.
watching these videos would make me feel like I'm terrified.
Yeah.
You know
Oh
what I
man,
mean?
Dustin, I think you're mentioning something earlier. You said, as the father, my desire is protection.
Yes,
Protect. I want to protect. And in this situation, you can't.
I
Like,
can I know, and I'll be honest with you, I don't like that, and I don't think
yeah,
most men don't,
I don't
but
think so.
realistically, I think if you just lean into that. And that's where I think this is where ultimately, like, my trust in Jesus has to supersede that, like, okay, beyond me being able to be the one who's able to, solve any issues that come up or any protection, things like that, that I'm going to do my best to lead my family, plan these sorts of things, get all the information I can, go into it as prepared as I can. But then ultimately, this is beyond me.
Mm,
And to come to that spot, it took me a little while, and I think I just wanted to be confident that I was doing the right thing. And again, I mean, as men my age, 41, we didn't have a lot of people, a lot of men leading us in this way to say, hey, yeah, when your wife's pregnant, like, you should be getting educated with her about it. You guys should be reading books. You should be getting some resources to help you understand what's going on. You need to be present. Like that's totally different. Like, there was none of that, and I'm sure I'm not the only man that would say this. The men that we saw growing up were purposefully not present, and I would say even sometimes encouraged to not be present, like, because they weren't helpful. You
yeah.
know what I mean?
It
Like,
was a
and
cultural thing.
it
Yeah.
is, yeah, totally, and that gives them an out. And so if you're a guy who really doesn't want to engage your family, then to be told, like, "Hey, just don't even be here." I could see the temptation to being like, "Cool, I'll catch you
Okay.
on the other side." You know what I
Good
mean?
luck.
Good luck. But if there's men out there listening to this, I would really encourage you, just lean in, learn what's going on, because as you bump up against your inadequacies, you also bump up against the absolute glory that is childbirth. Just the amazing design, the amazing things that our wives do, what their bodies do, how they were made, what's actually happening. It's absolutely incredible. And if you just bail out, and then you're missing out on so much just beautiful design that's there, and figuring out, how can I be helpful here? How can I serve my wife, my child, and everybody in this room by being helpful? I remember talking to our midwife, just like, I just want to be helpful. I talked to our doula, like, if you could just help me to know when I'm not being helpful, because my temptation is going to either be doing things that aren't helpful or not doing something that could be helpful. You know what I mean? Because in those moments, you definitely need to go in with a plan, but also in those moments when your adrenaline's just firing just at 1,000, it's really important to have some people, and just have your heart be at a heart posture of, I want to serve here. I
Mm,
want to serve here. I want to serve well here. And what does my specific wife want and need? Because
yeah.
this is another thing. I remember, like, listening to books. I'm like, can you just tell me, like, straight up, like, can we just have, like, I need to know for sure that this is it. And it turns out that there's a lot of things that certain women might like that other women might not like. And to get to know your specific wife's needs and what she desires. Now, some of that I already knew, because being married for 10 years, like, I remember they would offer up some suggestions and stuff. I'm like, my wife would hate that. She's not gonna want that. She's not gonna. And then, there's certain things like, oh, I know for sure that she would want that. Leading up to, because you got 9 months, for at least 9 months there, so to find a good resource, like for us, the podcast, my wife would listen to the podcast every night while she was in the shower. So it was kind of funny, because I could hear your voice. You know, this is when I first met you. I was like, you got to know, like, I've heard your voice coming from the shower for 9 months or whatever. and and then she would come back and share with me, like, oh, I think you need to listen to this, because she knew where my fears were, and in some of the episodes you would address things and then she would let me listen to it. I'm like, okay, that's really good, that's helpful, that was helpful. And then the book that we were going through, we had an audio book, and for me, like, the whole pregnancy, I knew I was going to be on foot rubbing duty, Men out there, I'm pretty sure most women would, this would be like across the board, unless, there might be some that, but it was the rhythm that we got into was like a nightly foot rub while we listened to this book. Now, the good news about that is that I would usually only rub for like the duration of the chapter, because my wife had no concept of like when the foot rub should end. You know what I mean? Like it's like we had an hour in. I'm like, honey, she's like, no, just a little bit longer. so so once we got into like, all right, it's gonna be a chapter, 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatever. That's the foot rub time. And also I would say this too, as a man, like when I'm listening to something, I shouldn't say as a man, as me, when I'm me personally, when I'm listening to something, like I need something to do. And so when my wife and I had tried to just sit on the couch and read a book and then talk about it, I wouldn't have continued with it. I'll be honest with you. I would have struggled so hard. But like if I was able to just put my mind to like even a foot rub, I could
Rubbing some
listen.
piggies.
I can just then I was doing something, you know what I mean? And like for me that was really helpful. So if you have I guess a husband out there and you're trying to go through some resources and he's like me and he needs to just kind of do something, obviously I can't do something like super intricate that's going to take my mind away from things, but just kind of to have something that I didn't, that was really helpful.
I love that. That is so helpful, Dustin. I mean, I would have
Good.
never thought of that. I would have
Yeah.
never thought to recommend that. What an amazing recommendation.
Good. I'm glad. Maybe there's somebody. I mean, yeah, there's gonna be some lady right now who's
You
who's
got some
who's
wives sharing this
their
episode.
their feet are swollen and they're like, honey, please, please, please. And then if you go to them and say, okay, how about just for 20 minutes, we'll listen to this episode while they're doing it. That way, you don't get into the endless foot rubbing zone.
I love it.
Which can happen. So all that to say, listening to that, I started to get more and more educated. I started to learn about things that I just never knew. Even with our first child, like I started to learn even more and more, and I started to get excited about it as I watched these birth videos. Like I remember the first birth video that I watched, I literally almost started crying because
Mm.
it was so intense. And I was like feeling for them and I knew that this was coming up. It was just really an intense thing to watch. Like I guarantee if you were to talk to most men and say, hey, you want to sit down and watch, like obviously men who are married, who have had children, you know, engage and watch some of these birthing videos, most men would be like, man, it's too intense for them.
Mm.
And which is ironic, side note, that we have a huge culture of men having no problem watching sex, but are terrified of watching birth.
Wow. All right, Dustin, you can just preach. You can
Uh,
preach today.
I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that there's something there, but I think that we're not taught as young men the glory of birth. We're taught that
Mm.
it's some mysterious thing that happens and they go behind the curtain and then they come back out,
Wow.
like that's the prevailing thing. And so to be able to kind of be let in on some of these things in the right context, as I kept watching these videos, with my wife, of course, I started to see some differences. I started to
Mm.
see, some of these things. I started to, instead of going into them feeling like, oh, just terrified, going like, all right, let's see how she handles this. Let's see what the different environment is. Let's pull from, maybe let's watch and see. Oh, we really like that about that. Let's take that from there and apply that to our situation if we can. And we began to go, or let's not do that. You know what I mean? And so that was really helpful, to me. And it was helpful for this class to have curated some birth videos. I don't think I recommend just going out googling birth videos. So, um, which I don't know how many men have ever done that.
Probably not too
It's
many.
probably not too many.
Far
But we
too
also
prevalent.
live in a time too where there's been people pulling back the curtain a little bit more
Mhm.
on that. And so to face that uncomfortability and to start to get educated on stuff was super huge for me and for my wife going into this birth. And what we ended up, I remember the night before our daughter came, we had just really landed on rest.
Mm.
Like we were going to go into this birth We were a week away from the due date, and we were going to go into this birth with rest. We were going to that we knew that the best thing for my wife's body, the best thing for our heart, the best thing for our relationship, the best thing for the midwife, the best thing for the doula, everybody involved, was if we just really sought to rest and to not rush the fruit, so to speak,
Mm.
and to try to stay calm. And because we knew from our last birth, like when our son was born, it was like soon as the contraction, it's like, all right, okay, all right, what are we doing? You see that on the, you start freaking out, and that didn't help anybody.
Yeah.
30 hours in, when we look back, I was like, I wish I would have conserved some of that energy at the beginning. But also, we learned a lot that by resting really helps my wife's body, which is another reason we wanted to do a home birth. My wife is a homebody. She loves being at home, and for her to be at rest a lot of times is her being at home. So it
Mhm.
made so much sense for us that if we are trying to do something so significant where your body needs to be completely comfortable in that rest, that in our house is going to be the best place for that to happen. And once
Wow.
I came to that conclusion, I was like, yeah, my wife is going to do better, do better here. Then I was like, okay, this is good. We got a good team. I know she's going to be good here. I feel like I'm going into this not blind. This is what my wife wants. And
Mhm.
it's not like she just wants it. Like she wants this after she's done, just a massive amount of research. And in our marriage historically, when my wife has done a lot of research on something and still wants to do it, I have yet to find a time when that hasn't worked out for
Yeah.
me.
Yep. Absolutely.
So,
That's
okay.
amazing.
All that to say,
Wow.
yeah, that's leading up
All
to
that
it.
to say,
Yeah.
yeah, you are the night before you guys have your baby. So you're
Yes. Let me
going
tell you
into
the
this with
exciting
rest.
part. Yes.
Tell
Let me tell
me.
you the exciting part. So, the day before, we celebrated my birthday because my birthday was supposed to be like 2 weeks after the baby was born, and we knew that my birthday was going to get totally eclipsed, and there was going to be no birthday for me. So we decided to go out. We had like a pancake dinner situation. Went out with our son. We had a great day. It was Saturday. We had a great day, and that night we go to bed. Next day is Sunday. I lead music at our church, planning to get up early in the morning, be at the church, getting everything going. And at midnight, we're in the bed, and I hear my wife say, "Water." Now, I thought she was saying, "I need more water," because for the past 9 months, I've been the water boy, and she guzzles water like there's no tomorrow. She has one of those giant Stanley cups where she drinks a ton of water, and I'm usually going to retrieve the water. I think every husband out there listening, most of the time, you're you're going to fill up the water. It's one of the small things we can do as men. Just get them some water. I remember that was going into the birth too. Just make sure my water doesn't go out. I got this. And so she said water, and I thought she meant get her water. And she said, and then I get up to go get her water. She's like, no, my water broke. And I was like, oh, I was like, really? Because with the first birth, they had to break her water. There was no water breaking. So I was like, oh, are you serious? You sure? And she's like, yeah, I'm really, really sure. So we get up. It's like 12:30 a.m. and we had everything ready for the home birth, but just not out ready. So like got the birth pool and put it up in the living room. Didn't blow it up yet. Put it in the living room. We put out some snacks. We had some snacks for everybody. We had candles, and we got the whole house kind of ready. Took us about an hour, and then we turned and looked at each other, and we're like, okay, well, we'll let the doula know that the water broke, but we're doing good. No need to come. We'll let the midwife know the water broke, but hey, we're gonna go back to bed. That's literally what we were like. We're gonna go lay back in bed and try to get some rest. We're gonna try to rest. So me and my wife, we took a couple pictures at that time of us smiling at 12:30. We went back to bed and we fell asleep. And I remember probably about like every hour or so, my wife would get up and use the bathroom. And she'd come back in and be like, "You okay?" And she's like, "I think I'm good. I'm good." Lay back in the bed and fall back asleep. And my wife probably doesn't want me to share this, but I'm gonna share it anyway. Which she's not here today because she's in the throes of nursing, so you just get me. But I remember her snoring, and I was like, "This is good. Snore away, babe. You just snore away over there. you, it was one of the only times I was delighted to hear my wife snoring next to me, which she doesn't do a lot of snoring. Let me clear the record. I'm the snorer.
Let me be fair.
Let me be fair. So I was like, okay, good. She's sleeping. So I got up at like 6 in the morning because I'm getting ready to fire off some text to the people at the church saying, hey, I'm not making it. Fire off some text to my brother and sister in law saying, hey, you need to come get our son. We had everything we knew the action plan. So I get up, I fire off all these texts to people, hey, not going to make it today. And my wife gets up and she is now, contractions are happening. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to time these contractions. I'm going to time them, how far apart they are, how long they're lasting. And I'm going to update the midwife. This is where we're at. So I'm trying to time my wife's contractions. And she's like asking me to put pressure on her lower back, which is, I knew that was coming. I was like, all right, we're just going to rest, through this, putting pressure there. And I thought there's going to be a little break in between each one of those. There was no break, Caitlin. Like they were coming back to back, like lasting a while. And so I'm trying to fire off some text saying, "Hey, doula, it's probably going to be a good time to roll on through." So she's like, "I'm on my way." She's like 30 minutes out. We go into the kitchen. We're in the kitchen, and my wife starts talking like, "I don't know if I can do this." And so here's the good news. We had listened to enough books and things like that to realize that when she starts talking like that, that means we are like transition time. Like, and so at first I'm like, okay, either this is really bad and we're at the very beginning of the birth and she's already feeling like she can't do this, or things have progressed way further than what we thought and she actually is there. So my wife had the strong desire to go up to the bathroom, and she shimmied up our stairs into the bathroom and she said, please. She didn't say please. She said, reach down there and see if you can feel anything. And so when I reached in there, Caitlin, like 2 inches, there was a baby head. And I'm like, okay, here we go. You know what I mean? Like, and so I, at that time, my wife's standing on at the sink, kind of standing up. I grabbed a pillow. Actually, we already had a pillow, but I put a pillow underneath her. And my son's room is like 5 feet from our bathroom. And I can hear my son in there just singing. It's like 6:45 in the morning, and he's in there singing like, "Yeah, Jeeba love me, yeah, the Bible tell me to." He's up there doing that. He's in there singing, and my wife is like low moaning, like letting out some primal stuff in the bathroom 5 feet away. And there's no way to close the bathroom door at this point. There's no way. And so called the midwife and said, "Hey, the baby is on the way." And she's like, "I'm on my way." So at this point, I have midwife coming, doula coming, and my brother-in-law coming. All I know they're converging on. It was a beautiful January morning. The snow was just softly falling that day. And my wife, with all of her training, began to just slowly and just ever, she is an absolute legend. But she knew that she wasn't going to start pushing until she knew the transition was happening. So as soon as I told her, hey, there's a head, then she just began to slowly release that little baby. And I initially saw the head come out, and I could see the hair on there, and it was like a white head, like it was white, but I was able to see the hair. And I told my wife, I can see her hair. And I remember my wife, like, well, now she says that was really helpful because then she was able to just kind of really slow, like, obviously wanted to really push, but she was able to just slowly push. And Caitlin, that little baby's head came out and her little eyes just popped right out and opened and looked straight at me. And so I was behind my wife, and her eyes had kind of, I could see her eyes there, and I knew, okay, she's facing backwards. This is good, And obviously, leading up to the birth, we were low risk. They were able to tell baby's in good position, all that sort of stuff. Everything was good. And when that little baby's eyes opened up, and it just like, I just went straight into like joy mode. There was no more fears. It was just, here comes this little baby, and I'm the first person that she's seeing. Obviously, she probably couldn't see me very good, but I'm still going to credit it as
Oh,
that.
for sure.
And so her head slowly came out. And as soon as her head came out, then there was a bit of amniotic fluid that came out after that. And I expected that. And I'm like, okay, I know this is the time where I just need you just to rotate, little girl, just rotate those shoulders right on out. And as soon as she kind of just spun a little bit and those shoulders came out, it was like, whoosh, she just came out, and she was, covered in all the vernix, so she just kind of stuck to my hand, and I knew that that was the case. That was another thing. A lot of people don't know that when these babies, when they come out and they're covered in this vernix, like, unless you knew that, you'd be like, what in the world, what, why they all look all white, what's going on? And so I knew that was the case. But all over our bathroom, floor, it was just, I mean, Caitlin, it looked like a murder scene in there.
Oh no.
But I knew I knew that that's like, okay, there's going to be some blood, there's going to be
Mhm.
some amniotic fluid. This is no reason to concern. I had the baby in my hand, and I was just in shock. I was just in total shock that here she is. My wife said, "Give her a slap." So I kind of turned her over, gave her a little bit of a pat, and she started crying. I sat my wife down on the ground. I handed my wife our sweet little precious daughter, and at that time, I didn't even think to like look if she was a girl. Like, we were told she was a girl, but I did. Only thing I was thinking about is like, baby, okay, mom, okay, And when my wife, when she heard the kind of splash on the bathroom floor, she thought I had dropped the baby. She thought that I had like, but like, I had her, I kind of guided her out. It wasn't like I just had my hand on the ground just going, all right, you know, but I had initially planned to catch the baby. Like, we had worked with the midwife. She asked like, would you like to catch the baby? I was like, yeah, that would be awesome. I would love that. And again, I would have never said that 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the idea of cutting the cord was like, I get to cut the cord? Are you serious? There's no way you're gonna let me do that, you know? So, but now I had done enough. I had learned enough to go, yeah, I would love, like, what a miraculous gift to be able to say, I caught my child. Like, how cool is that? Like, how many people get to say that? And so when I thought about catching her, but then in my plan, in my head was, then I hand her straight off to the midwife or my wife, right? That was as far as like my dream had gone. So when I handed her to my wife, and there's no midwife and there's no doula there, that's when I began to be like, okay, I'm excited for them to get here. you know, I was like, okay. So I went and got some towels downstairs, brought the towels back up because I knew my wife, not for the baby, but just for the floor. But when I went downstairs, I had blood all over my hands, blood all over my feet, and we have white floors in our house, white walls, white floors, and it looked like a murder scene. If our son would have came out of his room, he would have thought something happened to mom, and dad was the chief and only suspect in this situation. But at that time, my adrenaline was pumping so hard, and I was so excited, and I was just so delighted that my wife was there, baby was doing good, and I'm going, okay. I think I knew the next thing to come was going to be delivering the placenta. That was the next thing that was coming. I wasn't quite prepared for that. I didn't do intensive placenta delivery training. Uh, and so, praise God, though, right before that, like, I mean, I'm talking 5 minutes after the baby was born, which we were already planning to have delayed cord clamping and, cutting. The midwife shows up at the door. Caitlin, and she came into that house. She might as well floated in like an angel of light. She came in just ready to rock and roll. I knew she had all the stuff that was needed. She came in, and for people out there who maybe they won't get this reference, but there's a scene in the Lord of the Rings where they've been fighting, and Gandalf comes over the mountain, right? And the sun comes up, and he's in this white, robe, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's here! He's gonna save the day." That's what she was like. She was like, just this absolute beaming good goodness that came into the house. They were able to deliver the placenta. They made her some food. They got everything all cleaned up. The doula came. My brother-in-law ended up coming. I was able to go into my son's room finally, which he stayed in his room like a good boy. Like all the time we've been working with him to stay in his room. It finally paid off. I went into the room, his room, and I looked at him and I said, "Hey, bud, your sister's here. Baby Ember is here." And he looked at me. He's like, "She, like, she's here?" "Yeah, she's here." And I said, "Do you want to meet her?" And because at this time, my wife had been stabilized in the bed. The midwife and the doula were tending to her. And they had told me, "Hey, there's very little, there's like no tearing here. Like, she's doing great. Baby is breastfeeding." I'm like, "Yes." And then I said, "Is it a girl?" I asked them, "Is it a girl?" Because I didn't even like, I didn't. And they're like, "Yeah, it's a girl." So I get my son, take him in there. We get to meet little baby Ember. Mom is doing great. And this was like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And so again, they made us some breakfast. They cleaned up everything. And by 10 o'clock, they said, "You guys are doing great." We weighed the baby, did all that. At 10 o'clock, they said, I think you guys are doing good. And we'll leave you guys now with your precious little baby. And there, my wife and I were sitting at 10 a.m. The night before, had no idea, and we would have a baby that next morning. And we sat in the bed as the snow falled, and we just basked in the glory of this moment. And that whole day we had just to ourselves. And I remember at around like the lunchtime, I was like, I still have energy. Like, I'm ready to go, because I was preparing myself for like a 30-hour marathon. And here we had the baby, and I'm like feeling as good. Like, I was feeling great. And then we didn't have anybody coming into our situation. We were at home. The whole experience of just being at home, of having time together, these sweet moments together that we only ever get once, it was absolutely incredible. And I was just on a complete high that me, little old Dustin, gets to write in the book of his life. There's a chapter where he delivers his daughter. And forever I will have 1,000 punches in my man card from being able to say that. And what a gift it was. What an absolute gift that God gave us. And looking back, even though the plan wasn't for me to have a more unassisted, birth, we knew that was a possibility, and so we kind of knew that that was the case. But looking back, I mean, all the benefits that came leading up to having a home birth and after the home birth was just absolutely night and day. Like, it made the whole experience of bringing a child into this world just so sweet. Like, the day of and the week after, we weren't in a deficit. Like,
Mm.
we were in a total abundance, like just absolute abundance. And so again, I'm so grateful that to be given that experience. Thankful little baby Ember's now coming up on 4 months. So I'm still like fresh on it. Like even talking about it, I'm excited. I was telling everybody about it that week. I was like, we would have people deliver food and I would tell them about it. I would tell people at the grocery store or whatever. Like I was so excited to share this story. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it here today.
Oh man, I am so I'm so pleased to hear that. this this story it's so fun to hear your joy and excitement
Mm,
in sharing it, and it is so fun to have a father's perspective on all of this. Just
mm,
such a special treat, Dustin. Thank you.
mm.
You told it
Yeah.
beautifully. It was
Uh,
amazing.
we'll see
And
if my wife listens to this. We'll see. You should have said this.
she
Why
might
did
have
you
some
say that?
corrections. We'll take her
Yeah.
notes and put them in the show
Sure, that
notes.
sounds great. Yeah. Disclaimers, yeah.
Oh man, wow. Well, Dustin, it makes me think back how we got connected.
Mhm.
I had received a message from you after you guys had baby Ember talking about the podcast.
Yes, I felt compelled to reach out to you and say, "Hey, just wanna know thank you so much because we even though we had our team, like our midwife and our doula, I felt like you were like the silent partner in the team that was that helped us get to where we were going, and I felt like it was I wouldn't have been right for me not to say like, "Hey, thank you so much for all that you do," because it really helped us out. I was just overflowing with gratitude after we just had her. And I'm like, who was all involved in this? Who's everybody that's involved? Because I
Wow.
just need to give him a high five, and so that's what that was. Yeah,
That was so meaningful. So meaningful. And it's been so special because, you, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned at the very beginning, you work for Samaritan
that's right.
Ministries.
Hmm.
And I have been a huge lover of Samaritan for many years
So
now.
cool. That's so
Yeah,
cool to
it
find that
was
now.
so neat. And it was so neat for you to reach out. It was the Samaritan Ministries is like in my DMs. I'm like, what is this? It just
Uh-huh.
just so amazing. And the partnership that we've, been able to create through this is just wild.
It's awesome. I'm so glad that that worked out because, yeah, initially it was like just reaching out to say thanks. And then we started talking about Samaritan. You're like, yeah, I've been Samaritan for a long time. Love Samaritan. I feel like my wife told me like there was a couple, maybe there was some time where maybe she had heard you talking about it. Because when you're talking about home birth, the question that comes up is, well, how do we pay for this? Like, what is your healthcare? What is your insurance doing? All that sorts of questions naturally come up. And so to hear that you've been using Samaritan, it was super shocking to me because I could say I've been working at Samaritan now for almost 10 years. And as far as having a home birth, I feel like the Samaritan guidelines are just really robust to make that to where they are able to share and enter into a home birth situation so much easier and seamless than an insurance option.
Oh, it's a
So
slam dunk. It's
it
a
is,
it's a
yeah.
home run.
And I think some of that comes from Samaritan is just staunchly pro-life, and so you look at our guidelines. It's not, it's and especially in regards to like freedom of care too. So Samaritan's really big on having the freedom to get the care that you and your family want. So it makes sense to support home births, and honestly, yeah, I mean, in many cases, having a home birth is going to be far less expensive than if you were to go to a hospital. Like with our son, it was astronomically more expensive than with our daughter. So, but for have people, again, Samaritan, I've been there for quite some time. It's a beautiful option for Christians who are looking for healthcare. I mean, Samaritan's been around for 30 plus years doing what we're doing, but the idea has been around for thousands of years. Really, all that's happening is that at Samaritan, we're coordinating this sharing process that each month as a member, I'm helping somebody with their medical need. And then if I have a medical need, I submit my bills to Samaritan and they assign people to send me not only the financial help that I need, but they'll usually send you notes and cards. So it's coordinating not only the moving financial resource around, but it's moving like a giant prayer effort around, which is at the heart of why. If you were to tell me like 10 years ago you're going to work in healthcare, I'd be like, oh no way. That
What?
stinks.
Why?
Well, it's like the who wants to do that. Whereas if I right now, like I get to like in the midst of a medical need and people having medical needs, people are really tender to the things of the Lord, really open to getting prayed for. And one of the things that insurance misses is that when people have a medical need, there's more than just the financial part that's needed. Like when we are in the hospital, if you know somebody that's in the hospital, and to have people come up there and pray for you or send you notes or write you cards, it's really a rich time for ministry. I mean, there's pastors out there who just do hospital visits and they're going around, and these people are open and ready to not only hear the gospel but also hear true things about Christ. And they actually end up a lot of times leaving the medical situation more like Jesus as a result of these frail bodies. And so that's where Samaritan is really coming in to say, hey, not only we want to, yeah, the financial part is important and we're moving around like tens of millions of dollars every month, we're also really interested in the community of Christians supporting one another in times where we really need that. So anyway, I love being at Samaritan. It's a beautiful thing, especially now in our country right now where the idea of healthcare is such a contentious topic. To have an option where people, it's a beautiful, like something beautiful is happening. It really is just a glorious way to be like, hey, this is how the family of God is caring for one another, so that he might know that we're his disciples, and that people might, really see that even in this area of healthcare, that God is doing something beautiful. That makes it then, now I'm excited to talk about Samaritan. And
Hmm.
so, but it's not uncommon, yeah, for people, especially if they're looking into home birth. I would say if you're out there and you just got married, you're looking for healthcare options and you're kind of bent towards this, reach out to us. Or if you're just turned 26, or there's a lot of people out there that are in different seasons of life that maybe are looking for a different healthcare option, whether it's your current one is too expensive, or you don't like, what they're covering, or they they don't really align with what you believe. Reach out to Samaritan. There's a bunch of people who love Jesus who are on the other side working there. I go to the office every week. I can tell you, there's a whole gang of them that will pick up the phone and will talk to you and find out if it's a good fit. At the very least, they would pray with you. And so it's just a joy to be there. And it's a joy to hear that you use Samaritan, and a lot of people that probably are listening to your podcast might be able to benefit from it. So, yeah, reach out to see if it's a good fit. And yeah, what a cool kind of partnership that's starting to, really blossom and grow. And I pray the Lord continues to bless your ministry and the things that are happening on the podcast, and then with Samaritan as well.
That was beautiful, Dustin. Wow. Yes, I love the flexibility of care through
Hmm.
Samaritan. I love the community, which you mentioned. That's one of the big things for me we live in an area of time that's just, it seems so siloed. And
Hmm.
yet Samaritan's there offering community,
Hmm.
offering that opportunity to bless others and to be blessed by others. And in such a time of need, it's so special, so wonderful. So I'm so grateful that Samaritan is a sponsor. And if you guys are listening and you do want to know more, it's so easy. There's a link in the show notes that you can go to, a little form you can fill out. And
Hmm.
once you fill that out, someone from Samaritan, they will contact you, give you all of the information, talk back and forth, pray with you. And as a thank you from me, when you submit that, I actually grant access to the first module of Happy Homebirth Academy. So I like to be able to provide
So
that.
cool.
Well, it's
I know.
just,
I should have
it's,
reached out prior. Should have reached out
right?
prior to us having having a baby. Why don't we
I'd
do
like
this a
to
long
know
time
more.
ago? Yeah. uh, really missed my
Like, wait,
opportunity
is
there.
this
Yeah.
Dustin? Is this Dustin that filled out this sheet? Like, the office is
I will.
confused.
Yeah, I will do that if we have another baby. I'm gonna get a. I'm gonna get free. I'm gonna
Free
get free.
module,
I'm
baby.
gonna do it.
Oh my goodness, Dustin, it has been just such a joy, such an
Yeah.
honor to have you here. All of the information that you shared, just sharing your story so beautifully, so much hope in all of
Mm.
this. And that's what I've loved about your story individually, and then your information about Samaritan. Just so much joy and hope. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so
Mm.
much, Dustin, for coming on the Happy Home Birth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. What a delight, and continue again to keep doing what you're doing. And it's having a great effect, and it's had a great effect on me. So I appreciate you so much.
Okay, who here loved hearing this story from Dad's perspective? Who here is going to be sharing this one with your spouse, especially for that little foot rub inspo? Am I right? Dustin's probably going to be getting a lot of thank you messages to the Samaritan account. So let's start with our educational tidbit. In this episode, we heard about a mom who experienced a third-degree tear with her first birth, but no tear with her second. What is the deal with tearing? So let's dive a little deeper. Many first time mothers, and actually many mothers in general, have a great fear of tearing when they give birth. This makes sense. Tears are not particularly fun. In fact, I don't think I've heard any mother say, "Oh, yay, I tore." But let's take some of the mystery away from this topic. First of all, what is a tear? Now, when we talk about tearing, we're discussing the area of the vagina, the perineum, all the way back to the anus. What degree a tear is, first, second, third, or fourth, depends on the depth of that tear. So, a first degree tear is a skin deep tear at the vagina. It's not muscular, and it's often not something mothers are going to seek suturing for. By keeping the legs together over the following days and weeks, these tears can heal up nicely, especially if you apply some Manuka honey to the site. Now, a second degree tear is slightly deeper. This tear does extend into some of the muscle tissue of the perineum, and many mothers do choose to have a suture or two or some more for a second degree tear. Depending on the tear, though, some mothers and midwives are comfortable allowing this tear to heal up on its own. These tears require more time for healing and truly need mothers resting with legs together to allow the muscle fibers and skin to heal well. Now, a third degree tear extends to the anal sphincter muscles, which does require suturing as these muscles control bowel movements. And a fourth degree tear, while very uncommon, it is the most severe, and that would extend into the rectum. Okay, so what's the good news out of all of that? Well, our guest actually alluded to it in the interview. When pushing on your back with an epidural, it is nearly impossible to tell what's going on, what kind of pressure is needed at each point during pushing, and when your body's asking you to back off and slow down. Coached pushing, which often happens in the hospital, where you're being told how to push instead of listening to your body, is a large cause of these more intense tears. Now, let's talk about giving birth at home. Of course, there's no epidural, so you can feel exactly what's happening, and your body can alert you when it's time to slow down and pause. You're also able to choose what position is best for you. Most of the time, this will mean that you're not on your back, and position greatly impacts how your perineum will respond. As the midwife of this family shared, she, in all of her 600 plus births, had never experienced a third degree tear. Well, certainly there are no guarantees. Some babies have their hands up at their face or are in a more difficult position, or perhaps your body needs to get baby out quickly. But the chances of an intense tear are very small when your body is calling the shots. Even more so, there are helpful ways that you can support the integrity of your perineum during pregnancy and labor. These are the kind of topics that we delve into thoroughly inside of Happy Home Birth Academy. There is a link in the show notes if you're ready to join today. And finally, remember your perineum was designed to stretch, but it was also designed to heal. So if you experience a tear, your body knows how to heal. Okay, so let's jump into this week's episode roundup. And as we do that, I'm feeling like I could choose 1,000 different points to discuss, so I'm going to try to keep it to just a few. Number one, Dustin's story. He is so vulnerable, and I feel so certain that with a listenership this large, there are a number of you who can relate to his experience with abortion and the potential pain that has stayed with you for years. Now, Dustin realized at some point that he was not truly accepting all of the grace and forgiveness available to him. It's like he felt like he needed to experience continual punishment, that maybe he and his wife would never be able to have kids because of what he had done, that maybe he and his wife would never be able to have kids. Maybe that was the punishment. But at some point, it became clear. When Jesus died on the cross, he died for every single one of Dustin's sins and every single one of yours. He came to give us freedom. And our job is to receive it. Next, I love how honestly Dustin shared what I know many fathers to feel, the sense that they want to take care of their wife, they want to take care of their baby. The reason that birth often makes men feel uncomfortable is the glaring reality that, wow, actually, I don't have control here. And boy, that uncomfortable feeling, if you're honest with yourself, might turn to the realization that, oh, wow, I guess I don't actually have control over a lot of events and situations around me. To release control, while it can be so difficult, is one of the most beautiful things that we can do as humans. And finally, I just love the joy that Dustin expressed as he caught his daughter in his own arms, as he saw her look at him while between worlds, really, both in and out. To imagine this happening all while his son is singing, Jesus loves me, in the next room. It's just beautiful and healing for the entire family. Oh, goodness, this truly is a story of redemption, isn't it? I hope you loved it. I know that I did. And that's all I've got for you for today, my friends. I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Are you looking to extend the home birth support, encouragement, and education? Join us in our Facebook group, Happy Homebirth Podcast Community, and check us out on Instagram at Happy Homebirth Podcast.